In this video, we're going to kind of cover the flow, the natural flow between the model, controller, and view inside of an MVC application, and dig in a little bit deeper around the idea of how do we capture data in a model, manage how it's handled in the controller, and then ultimately take that model data and push it to the view and then render it out on the screen. So we'll go back into our same week 4 MVC application. We have our Hello World action and view, which is part of our home controller. And what I'm going to start off by doing is adding a model to the models folder. So right click, add, class. We'll get the add new item dialog. We'll click on class, and we'll just make this class called student. So we now have this student class, and we'll just create a couple of simple properties. We'll create a first name, last name, and student ID. So we'll use that model throughout this flow. So we have a model. I'm actually going to go ahead and jump into my home controller, and I want to go ahead and create an instance of student, and we'll do new student, include my using statement, and I'll go ahead and auto-populate or pre-populate this instance with Kevin, last name of Gantos, and student ID of 12345. And what I want to do is I want to take this model, this student object, and I want to push it into my view. Now to do that, if we look at the view method, it has a couple of overloads. So you can call view by itself with no parameters. We can call view passing it an iView, which is an interface for the view, and that helps direct the view method to know which view we should be directing the user to. We do not have an instance of iView, so we're not going to use that. The second overload is to pass an object that is the model. Now, you'll notice that this is expecting an object, which basically means we could pass anything to our view. We don't have to specify exactly what we're going to pass. Honestly, the controller doesn't care what we pass. The expectation, though, is that when it gets to the view, that the view understand how to unpack that model. So there is a relationship there between the model, the view, and the controller. And we want the view to at least be aware of what kind of model is going to be coming to it. So what kind of object are we going to be passing to the view, and is the view prepared to handle that type of data? There's additional overloads for passing strings, which is the name of the view. We can pass an iView and an object model. We can pass the view name and a model. We can pass the view name and a master name. View name, master name, and model. And then we're back to an emptyless method call. So I'm going to pass stu, which will be my model, and we're going to pass that to the view. Now if we flip back to the view real quick, we'll notice that we still have the same view bag of hello message, which I've now deleted that view bag line from my controller. So this line is no longer any good. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to do at model. You'll notice that model is a property off of this view. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that. So what this should say is this model is a, and then output the model type. So if we save everything, we will need to recompile. So you can do that by going to build solution. I usually just push F6 on my keyboard, and then once the build is succeeded, we'll do an F5, which will recompile and relaunch. And that brings us back into the home controller Hello World action. So here's our Hello World page, and it says this model is a week_4 MVC.models.student. So this is a student that is getting received by the view. Great. Now we can go through and we can do some unpacking. So we could go on and say BR tag first name is model.firstname, last name is model.lastname, student ID is model.student ID. So by making these changes only to the view without modifying the controller, we can save, and we can go back to our page and hit refresh. And what happens is that it will reparse and reload that page. Now, what you're seeing here is a runtime binder exception. And it's stating here that an exception occurred, and then the information it's giving us, it says that student does not contain the definition for last name. So let's jump back, let's hit OK. Let's jump back to our Solution Explorer and let's look at our student class. And in fact, we don't have last name with a capital N. I made a typo, and we have last name with a lowercase n. So our model binding is the term. So this is called model binding. This binding occurs at runtime, and it occurs dynamically. So what Razor is attempting to do is it's attempting to look at the model, which is a student object, and find a property that's last name with a capital N. Well, our model, our student class, does not have last name with a capital N. It has last name with a lowercase n. So the binding exception occurred, which is what we saw pop up. Now if we continue through this, we'll get this yellow screen which basically outputs the same exact exception. We can come back into our view and replace the capital N with a lowercase n and refresh. And we'll remove that breakpoint and hit continue. And we get out the output we expect. First name Kevin, last name Gantos, IDs of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that flow is pretty simple. We created a model, we, in this case, populated our model inside of the controller, and then we took this model object and we passed it to our view. In the view, we then took from the model, we grabbed the first name, the last name, and student ID properties, and they were presented in our view page. Now, this type of view, the current Hello World view, is considered a dynamic view. And what that means to you and I is that there is no strong typing occurring. There's nothing on this page that tells it what model is. It just says you have a model. It's a simple model, and you as the developer have to know what type of object is coming to this view. There's no IntelliSense to help you know what properties there are. I'm hitting Control Spacebar to try to get an IntelliSense pop-up. It doesn't know anything about the model. It considers it a dynamic, and then it is doing that binding at runtime to determine if things are accessible. This can be very good when you have different types of models coming to a page. This can be bad 99% of the time, though, when you have one or the same type of model always coming to the page and you're maybe having a lot of design time mistakes where you're forgetting to set up your models correctly. Or you want to have that extra sense of security knowing that the incorrect model is not being pushed to a particular view. So how do we take care of this problem? We can make our views strongly typed, which is where we're actually coupling or joining this view to expect only one type of model to be passed from the controller. So in our case, we're passing a student object to our view. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I want to delete Hello World, the view, from the views folder. I then want to do two things. I'm going to fix the casing on last name and make it a capital N. For consistency. And then I'm going to right click on this action again and say add view. Now I'm still going to call it Hello World because that's the name of my action. My template will remain empty, but instead of saying without model, I'm going to choose empty. And then this model class dropdown becomes available and gives me a list of available classes within my project. I'm going to choose student. I'll leave everything else the same and hit add. The same scaffolding process occurs, and the only real significant change that happens is that we now end up with this one line at the very top of our page that says model space week 4 mvc.models.student. This line strongly types this view page to say the content or the model that will be passed to this view must be of type student. More specifically, it must be this particular student class. What does that gain us? A few things. So we can go back and we can say first name, colon, @ model, dot. And now our model is no longer a dynamic. It actually is strongly typed to student. So it knows that we're receiving a student model. Because of that, it can provide us IntelliSense. So we can now say first name. We can say last name, colon, model, dot, last name. And I'm doing it intentionally. I'm keeping it lowercase. And you'll see now we even get this kind of design time compiler warning that tells us that student does not contain the definition last name with a lowercase n, that there is a issue there and that we need to correct it in order for it to run correctly. So we'll capitalize N and our compile or our design time error goes away, and then we'll say student ID colon model dot student ID. Hit save. Since we did make change to our student, I'm going to go ahead and recompile. We'll rerun again. And then we want to navigate to home/hello world. And here is our hello world page with a strongly typed view. Make some formatting adjustments to the view. Add some BR tags for spacing. Go back. F5. And there's our view with our student. So that is the essential flow that we'll be trying to create throughout our application. There are additional layers of complexity that will be incorporated, such as adding a data repository. So basically, instead of creating a student class right there inside of the controller, we'll have this repository class that will connect to our database, and that will be able to pull data from the database for us. We'll then take that data and then we'll push it to our view and allow our view to render out that data. Additionally, we now have strongly typed views so that we can control what kind of data is being exchanged from the controller to the view. So that's, again, a very important piece of providing stability and security and kind of that compile time integrity to your application to ensure that things are built and running correctly.